Thank you. Thank you so much for coming out on a rainy, a dark and rainy night, and just showing how much you care about the community, that you'd like to come out and engage a little bit with city staff um, and share ideas with one another with respect to a very, very important topic for all of us, and that is housing and the future of housing in this community. I'm Rob DeSpirito, and it has been my privilege and honor to be your city manager for about 9 months now. And it's been a fast 9 months, but I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I've just had a wonderful time getting to know members of the community, wonderful time working with the mayor and council, and also with an extremely talented workforce, extremely talented senior leadership team, and the rest of the employees. It's just been beyond my expectations. Um, but the engagement with the community is extremely important. That's why we wanted to add this additional conversation to a series of discussions that the mayor and council has been hosting over the years on the very important subject of housing and economic development. Mayor and council adopted a strategic plan in 2019, a strategic housing and economic development 10-year plan. And we're, as a staff, bringing forward at council's request some options for further consideration to help actualize the plan as has been previously adopted as policy by the mayor and council. But all of these things are very, very open to discussion. And it's very critical for we as staff, and also I know important to the mayor and council, that there's an opportunity for you to express yourselves on the proposals, the specific proposals that we're proposing to bring, as well as just your general thoughts on housing and other ideas and comments on the same subject as we think about the future of this terrific community. At this point, I would like to introduce my team that is with me here. I have on my immediate left Rosalind Roz Grigsby, who is our interim or acting director of housing and community development for the city. Next to Roz, yes, round of applause is it's fine. Absolutely, go for it. To Roz's left is Devin McNally, and Devin is our housing manager and will be leading a presentation this evening prior to us coming to an open forum for your questions, feedback, and input to us. And to Devin's left, we have Jessica Troop, one of our newest additions to our staff. Jessica. Jessica is our talented housing specialist, working very closely with both Devin and with Roz. So we certainly have a powerful team to work on your behalf as residents on the important subject of housing and planning and other topics of importance to you. On behalf of the mayor and council, again, we are pleased to provide this opportunity. I think that we can agree that we have a good number of things in common before we begin here. I think first and foremost, we all love this community. We can agree on that, I think. We also understand the importance of housing. Having decent, affordable, available, and attractive housing, I think, is a goal that we could all agree is important to this community. I also like to think that we, as a community, can identify, define, and solve problems together. This is your city government reaching out to you saying that we invite you to assist us in thinking through these things and thinking about how we can best provide the type of, in this case, housing for our current residents and guests, as well as the future of our community. We're a very dynamic community. The population, we have a lot of people who both would love to live here, would like to move here, as well as folks who are here and would like to stay here and be able to afford to stay here. And these are all very important things that we need to weigh And there's a lot of different techniques and ideas on the path forward, but we as a local government, particularly our staff, I know the mayor and council, we're all stronger by virtue of your input, your ideas, your feedback, respond to what you see us proposing, as well as introduce ideas of your own. Give us some comments and thoughts that you think will help improve the process as we're all pulling in the same direction for outstanding housing for this community. Tonight's agenda, we'd like to share a presentation regarding city housing. Devin is going to walk us in a moment through that. That will be to set the stage. I think this will cover some things that the mayor and council, the city has done historically, where we are now, and some proposals that are being discussed and debated presently and this coming fall, the rest of the fall before the mayor and council. Then, very importantly, you want to have an opportunity for your voice, for resident feedback, your questions, your comments, and this includes not just all of you in the room, but very importantly, we have a good number of folks who are joining us virtually this evening. And I want to thank our communications department for the arrangements for this evening, putting all of this together on relatively short notice and affording the capability for our residents who aren't able to join us in person tonight to nevertheless lend their voices to this event through the magic of virtual connection. So we look forward to all of those comments. We will walk through all of that. And at this point, I would like to turn the show over to Devin. Devin. Is your mic?
Can everyone hear me all right?
Oh. There you go.
It's a pleasure to have you all out here tonight. Just quickly, my name is Deb McNally. I'm the housing manager for the city of Tacoma Park. So I'm delighted to sit down and talk with you all today. I will very quickly go through this presentation because I know that everyone wants to have a chance to be able to stand up and be heard and ask their question or say their comment. So I will try to limit this as quickly as possible. I will say very briefly, if you would like a Spanish translation, we do have 2 interpreters here. If you would go back to our lovely city staff in the back, they can hook you up with a translation earpiece and have you set up. And then additionally, these slides will be posted on the website under our tax credit webpage. And we also have printouts over there. Thanks, Russ. So very briefly, we had our introductions and welcomes. We'll talk a little bit about our housing and economic development strategic plan. We'll talk a little bit about where we are today, the work we've done so far. We'll talk about a current proposal that's in front of City Council, which is a package of housing tax credits, and then we will open the floor for questions and comments. So I'll dive right in with our housing and economic development strategic plan. So this was a process that began in February of 2016. It was a 3-year process that led to the adoption of the full plan in October of 2019. And the goal of this plan is to set our housing policy for the next decade from 2020 to 2030. There were 3 overarching goals: preserving our existing affordable housing, producing more housing of a variety of types, and protecting renters, homeowners, and local businesses. And so there were 32 policies and objectives related to housing, and implementation is part of Council's priorities for the 2023-2024 session. So there was a lot of great work and effort that went into this plan, starting with online outreach and stakeholder interviews, going into listening sessions, a number of different ways to get resident feedback, open houses, and council work sessions, all culminating in the adoption of the plan in 2019. So where are we today? So back in July, we talked about our housing framework, and we talked about kind of stability, choice, and quality, and what are those indicators. And they're all telling us different things. So we have a large share of affordable rental housing in the city compared to Montgomery County, about 80% to about a third of Montgomery County's rental units. And we are by and large, a very affordable place to rent in the county, with a median rent well below that of the county and the state. We also have renters who stay for a long time compared to the county and the state. Conversely, we do have a slightly higher eviction rate because we provide this deeply needed affordable housing. When we look at choice, we see what we like to call a bifurcated housing market. We have this deeply affordable housing, and we have this deeply unaffordable home prices. So we have a significantly higher median monthly mortgage. We also have a homeowner rate for non-white individuals that is lower than the county and the state. However, we do have a greater diversity of home types out there compared to Maryland and Montgomery County. Unfortunately, not a lot of it is new. Only 11% of our multifamily has been constructed since 1980. And so what does that mean about quality? Well, the flip side of that is, unfortunately, we do have a lot of old and aging buildings, and we are seeing about similar levels of investment relative to the county. And so what we see there is we tend to have a few more violations per unit. And so there are some needs to reinvest in some of these older buildings. So we talked a little bit of about the plan, where we are today. And so now we're talking about kind of what we're working on to implement that plan. So one of the things that we launched was a tenants to owners program. And so we were able to secure a state grant to provide funding for buildings who might be going through the process of the sale, and how they can take advantage of what's known as the tenant opportunity to purchase law, which allows tenants first crack at purchasing their building in the event the building is up for sale. And so what this grant provides is funding for technical assistance, such as lawyers, an analysis of the building and kind of what's its strengths and weaknesses, and then also some assistance with the purchase of the building. We launched it last August, and currently we've assisted one building so far in exercising their rights. We also went and worked on our tenant displacement ordinance. So we created a new section that really talks about the responsibility and the rights that are associated with tenants' displacements related to fire, flood, these sorts of events, making sure that the landlord is responsible for housing their residents when this occurs, and setting forth compensation that the tenant gets. And that was adopted last September. We also have a suite of other policies in place that we are in the process of implementing or have been implementing for many years. I'll start with our rent stabilization ordinance that was put into effect in 1981, is a model throughout the country, and that restricts the amount that rent can be raised in a year. We have our tenant opportunity to purchase law, which I touched on earlier, which provides renters rights in the sale of their building. We have a quarterly tenant association meeting to try to share best practices, connect our renters together. We have our multifamily building improvement program, which provides grants to multifamily buildings that are not just investing in their buildings, but also working towards decarbonization through energy efficiency upgrades and electrification. We have our emergency assistance program, which provides assistance to residents in need, particularly those facing foreclosure, utility disconnections, or eviction because of failure to pay rent. We have our Commission on Landlord-Tenant Affairs, which provides a hearing for landlord-tenant disputes and helps provide a, let's call it, friendlier atmosphere for these disputes to be resolved. And then we also have our tenant displacement, both the city law and the county law that we help enforce as well. So there is a current proposal, which is part of our implementation plan, which is housing tax credits. So The reason why is we've been proposing this is they provide predictable financial support that can be used in obtaining housing. So a developer, when they are proposing a housing plan, can go forward to a lender, a bank, and say this is something that can be included in the financial analysis towards whether this project is feasible or not. The idea is that the credit would be proportional with the investment. So we are giving something up as a city, but we are trying to get something of equal value in return. It also can provide a higher subsidy than we could provide with a typical grant or loan. Usually our general fund or housing reserve fund limits us to about $200,000 to $300,000 per project. This would allow us to do significantly more. And then finally, it is part of our housing and economic development strategic plan. So there is one new slide, so I apologize. We want to talk really briefly about the missing middle tax credit. This was proposed as there are 4 proposals. It was aimed at incentivizing smaller scale multi-unit. We do have some other similar programs that are aimed at home ownership opportunities, including our Homestretch program, which is for first-time home buyers, our tenant opportunity to purchase program, and then we've had some collaboration with partners such as HIP and Habitat for Humanity on different projects related to affordable home ownership, including 320 Lincoln and the duplex at 7402 Garland Avenue. Right now, we're recommending removing this credit at the moment because there are pending county and state proposals that address missing middle housing, and we want to evaluate those as they move forward before we bring this forward for consideration. So I'll jump into the other tax credits that are being proposed, and I'll start with the new housing tax credit. So the goal of this is incentivizing the creation of new housing within the city. And so how it works is a 15-year credit for properties or projects that are constructing 10 or more net new units. So not replacing units, this is new housing construction. And the idea is that we're creating additional housing for local workers and families. We will be creating housing that is here for the next 20, 30, 40 years. Yes, I'm happy to answer questions at the end. Buy right, generally speaking, is done administratively through a staff review process. I would ask that everyone wait until the end. We'll have lots of time for questions, and that'll help me get through this presentation very quickly. So in cases of redevelopment, the project is scaled. We spent a lot of time thinking we want the creation of new housing, not to incentivize any sort of tear down or displacement, and so this would only credit new housing created. So the way it works is when a property is redeveloped, there's a subsequent increase in the assessed value of the property, and so we want to provide a credit for that increased assessed value. For the first 10 years, they get a credit of 100% of that increased value that they put into the property, and then over the next 5 years, it phases back in so that by year 16, they're paying the full amount that the tax bill would be. The idea is that we want the investment to come in, and then we will reap the rewards later. So looking at this, this would be only for areas that are zoned essentially for multifamily housing currently. This would not change any county permitting processes. So that would still, any project would have to go through the relevant county approvals process. And looking at this, what we did in a back of the napkin calculation is that the credit could be somewhere between 500,000 and 1.3 million. We're currently in the process of working with an outside firm to do a full fiscal impact analysis of this. So our second tax credit is related to the preservation of affordable housing. So the goal is safeguard our current housing that exists, particularly in difficult to provide housing types. So this would be similarly a buy right tax credit for our deed restricted affordable housing. And so what I mean by deed restricted is there is a regulatory agreement between the housing project and a government agency, whether it's the county, the state, or federal government. And so the idea is that that is our mechanism to make sure that the tax, that there is actually the affordable housing being provided. The idea is that based on the share of qualifying units, they would get the similar share capped at 50%. So if you have a 100-unit building and 50 of those units meet the criteria for a qualifying unit, you get a 50% tax credit. If you have 60 units, congratulations, we're very excited. You get a 50% tax credit as well. If you have 30 units, we still give you a tax credit. It's just a little bit less, 30% in this case. The agreements would continue as long as the building is under those regulatory agreements. So it would continue as long as they provided those affordable units. So when we presented this to council, we presented a suite of different policy options. We spend about $60,000 right now on our existing tax credits to affordable housing buildings. This is the estimated annual cost. So for example, if we picked the first option, which is for senior housing, housing for people with disabilities, or what is called extremely low income individuals, that would be an increase of about $40,000 a year. Our final credit that we are talking about and proposing is a reinvestment credit. And so this is the goal here is we know we have a lot of aging buildings, and so we're trying to encourage proactive investment and upgrades in those buildings. Obviously, we have a large number of multifamily buildings in the city, so we can't make this buy right, and so this would have to be something that is competitive and people would apply for, and we would evaluate and award these credits. But for the bare bones, they would have to be doing what's called substantial rehabilitation. So that's spending $6,500 per unit or more. And we would also make it a requirement that they could not displace any residents. So in working through this, what we landed on as a sweet spot would be a 10-year credit for 50% of their tax bill. And for larger buildings, unfortunately, because of their size and their large tax bills, we would handle those independently and would be approved by council on a case-by-case basis. And so when we brought this on July 24th, when we presented this to council, we provided a number of different funding options that we could potentially fund the program. We broke all of our multifamily buildings into categories. So our small scale buildings, so 2 to 6 units, our medium size, 7 to 19, and then our large buildings, which are 20 or more units, and looked at kind of if we had an annual credit amount of $50,000, we could do a certain number of awards every year. So for small buildings, 2 every other year, and so on and so forth. So the more we annually fund it, the more buildings we can reach. So we began this development process back in February of 2024 when we first talked about the new construction credit, but then went back to the drawing table and in July 2024 presented kind of this whole package of credits. We then spent August and September letting feedback kind of come in and working on it internally, and we'll be having it in council for consideration and potential passage in October. If it does pass, staff will then spend most of the coming year putting together administrative regulations and processes so that we could start awarding credits in the 2027 fiscal year. So that was a whole bunch of information, and so we have a website up has a number of blogs touching on a number of different subjects, all related to tenant protections, how the development process works, what the tax credits are. And so we encourage you to go take a look, read through it. I want to shout out our amazing communications team who has been wonderful about helping us put these together. And then we also have a webpage dedicated to our Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan that has all of the information about the development of the plan and a copy of the plan itself. So that was a lot of numbers. We will be now opening it up for our questions and comments. So what we're asking really briefly is if you can first try to keep your question or comment to about 2 minutes. I know we have a large number of people here and online. And then second, once you've said it, please allow another person to comment or speak so that we can get to everyone. What I will say is we'll have a couple of staff members going around, so just raise your hand and we'll be kind of popcorning back and forth. For people online, we will start with people in person and then jump to online, I think is probably the best way to handle it. So if you would like to raise your hand and have a question or comment, we'll start there.
I think we'll need to get these mics kicked on. Are we on? Maybe not. Is it? Stop. So, take water too. All right, I'm gonna start in the front right here and then work our way back. Here. And I'll bring it to you, don't worry.
Great. Hi, I'm Roxanne Fulcher. I live in Ward 1 on Maple Avenue. I first wanted to make a comment regarding the quality of housing. I know that there is a program that we can do improvements to our properties and then we can apply for rent increases, but I have never done that. I don't know anybody that has done that. I couldn't find information and I apologize if you have made that available, but as far as I know, there's no information available so that a person could make that decision about whether they wanted to put in stainless steel appliances or whatever. I know that's not even a thing. Let's say a dishwasher. So I wanted to just make that comment. And the other thing that I wanted to ask about is clarification about the tax credit for the buildings. So my understanding is that the city would only not receive new income from the new building, like if it's 10 units or whatever, or 10%, let's say, they're still going to get the what the original tax amount with the reassessment, and the reassessment is also going to be a real assessment. So that would also, because we all get assessments, and like, you know, and most people probably don't pay on the real value of their place, but we open the door to paying the real value when we do things, big things to our properties. So would that be a component of the program, that there would be a reassessment of the building itself? Because if there is, then you would recoup. The city would probably, I mean, I'm assuming buildings like that also don't pay real value, and so you would have an increase that would offset the 10% that you're not getting. And then the other part is, would those properties still continue to have their price or taxes increased over time, over the 15 years, that 90% or whatever percent they're being taxed on would still be increased over the years, so the city again would not lose the capacity to have that extra income as taxes increase? Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for your comment. In regards to kind of how that new construction would work, as part of the ending, when the building is constructed, it goes through a reassessment looking at the cost of all the materials, time, labor that goes in, and that is the new assessment it has going forward. What we are proposing is continuing to essentially collect the same property tax we would have without the project. So we're not giving up any revenue, but we are forgoing that additional revenue that we would have seen under that new assessment for the first 15 years. The full amount in years 1 through 10, and then kind of ramping back up in the next over the 5 years, so that by year 16 we're collecting the full amount. Yeah, and I think on the fair return petition, I know that there were some questions around that, and so there is we can definitely add more on the website about that process. Typically, we get only 1 or 2 per year at the moment. So,
We'll come right here and then I'll work in. Okay, I'm gonna hang on to it. That's all right.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah.
Tom Gagliardo. I live in Hodges Heights in Ward 1. This question is, I'm going to preface by saying that the question isn't whether what you've presented is good. The question is whether it can be even better. All right? I'm not anti-development. I want to see development on Hospital Hill. We have forgotten that the Adventists presented a plan in November of 2022 that provided for multifamily housing, affordable middle and so forth. So here's the preface to the question. There are existing, excuse me one moment, I'm sorry. There are existing state and county programs such as the Maryland Multifamily Bond Program, the Montgomery County Affordable Housing Opportunity Fund, and the Housing Production Fund to incentivize rehabilitation and construction of affordable housing. The bond program provides construction and permanent financing and leverages federal tax credits. The Housing Opportunity Fund provides capital for developers to bid competitively to provide, and I quote, current renters an opportunity to remain in their communities at affordable rents. And the $50 million authorized for the production fund is, according to Montgomery County, expected to stimulate the creation of nearly 8,800 new housing units. So the question is this: why do we need the tax incentives that you're proposing if these plans already exist? A more polite way to ask it might be, how does your proposal interface with existing programs?
yeah, so I think there's similarities in which this program would work with these other, let's call them capital sources. And then there's ways that ours are different. So we have a very unique housing market. I think that is a very interesting housing market and unique to Tacoma Park. And so what we are looking to do is incentivize new housing of all kinds. Many of these programs are focused more narrowly on affordable housing. And that is because Montgomery County and the state of Maryland have different housing markets. That said, the goal of our incentive is to be, let's say, the cherry on top, that little bit extra that helps push that project, helps make it pencil for that development. We know that we will never be the biggest money piece going into a deal. And so our goal is to try to make it a little bit easier. These are usually very complex projects. They take years to develop and build. And so providing that little bit of help can sometimes really make a difference. And so the hope would be is that if, for example, there was a project coming along that was tapping those sources of funding, we could also slot in with this program as well.
I miss everybody who's on the edges here.
Hi, want me to open?
Oh, no,
No,
no.
yeah. Hi, my name's Roger Schlegel, and I wanted to go on record as saying that I would think to keep true to our values, we should structure these proposals in ways that would increase the amount of affordable housing in proportion to what it is currently within the city. I wondered, in light of that, whether you have clarity on what percentage of the new housing in that 15-year tax credit program would wind up being affordable and how that lines up with our current proportion of affordable housing. And related to that, I had two other questions about that 15-year proposal, which would incentivize market rate housing, I suppose, of any size units. The first question is, how did you determine that that particular structure of 10 years and then sliding down for 5 would be the threshold point at which developers would say it is attractive to invest in Tacoma Park? How did you determine that particular structure? And my second question related to that is, why is there no sunset on this proposal and in essence, no targeted numbers of units that you wish to see built? Why did you propose it without any sunset?
Yeah. So some good questions there. So I'll talk a little bit about starting with kind of why we looked at setting it up the way they did in terms of the types of housing. So this policy is purely a financing tool. And so one of the things that it would interplay with is the zoning as it currently exists, which sets forward the size, number of units, and siting conditions around housing development. And this would have no impact on that. That is a county mandated process, and every housing project would still have to go through that. In regards to how this proposal is set up, the reason why we started with 10 to 15 really goes down to how certain home builders look at these sorts of projects. So generally speaking, when they're going out for financing, they have to demonstrate a 10 to 15, 20 year kind of fiscal, what they call pro forma, which is essentially how is the building going to perform. And so by providing this 10 years, it gives them some time to demonstrate that this project is feasible, and then slowly ramping it up so that we can also recoup the benefit of that investment that's been made in the city. In terms of a sunset, we have not proposed one because the hope is that we start that conversation and jumpstart. We haven't really seen any multifamily development in the city in 40 years, and it is not a process that happens overnight. It's a long process by which developers identify a piece of land, they think about building something, they might not build something, and so what we're hoping to do is start that conversation. That said, we've set a goal over 10 years of about 200 units. That's about the number that came down from about 2015 when we were looking at some of the data, that we were about 3,400 rental units. Now we're about 3,200 rental units. And so the hope would be to add those back.
And before we take the next question, we just wanted to give a quick reassurance to the folks on Zoom that we will get to your questions shortly. So again, we'll try to keep your questions as brief as you can, just so we can make sure we don't run out of time and everyone has a chance to be heard here. We'll loop back over this way and I will come back to the side of the room. Did you have your hand up? We crank the volume.
Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Carter Doherty. I live on Crescent Place in Ward 1. I had a question about the financing and the fiscal impacts of this. You know, it's interesting from a standpoint of like what's progressive and what's not, because the main source of tax revenue in Tacoma Park is, of course, people like me, single family homes. So in essence, you know, what you're asking is, I think, a very progressive ask, which is that people who own single family homes, you know, make a contribution to affordable housing elsewhere, all over the city, really. That having been said, the estimates I read in the documents, there's a pretty wide delta there. You know, I mean, I think the bottom number was 100,000 and the top was 407, if I'm remembering that correctly. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what's behind those estimates. And then second, whether there is any relevant interplay here between this and the coming attainable housing proposal of Montgomery County. I'm not speaking here on behalf of a group, but I'm active with a group called Montgomery for All. And one of our watchwords about anything you propose to get more housing is necessary but not sufficient, which is we need lots of things to address the housing shortage, including zoning, including the tax credits. So if there's any interplay there that you would find useful to explain, I would be interested.
Yeah, so in terms of our analysis, and I do want to stress that what we're working, we did a staff level analysis, and we are working with an outside firm to do a more in-depth, greater dive for a fiscal analysis that looks at kind of the impacts on revenue over a longer period of time, really dives into that. One of the reasons for the range in kind of these numbers is it really depends on the type of project being proposed. So what will that final assessment be? And then also what was the parcel of land's valuation before? So looking at, if they are that exists in Tacoma Park, that's a much higher change in assessment, and so would be more revenue foregone. Similarly, if it is, let's say something that has been developed as let's say a strip mall is being torn down into a new multifamily mixed use building, that might have a smaller change in kind of that full assessment. So there's a lot of numbers going in there. Additionally, kind of what rents are able to be charged for that building. Because we have such a unique housing market, they can't charge necessarily the same rents that they would charge in downtown DC or Silver Spring. And so there's a wide variety. With attainable housing, a lot of that is focused, I know, on a variety of different housing types and zoning. They're still obviously in those listening sessions, and they haven't brought forward a full zoning text amendment. The goal here is really looking at what's currently on the ground and seeing ways that we can unlock maybe a parking lot that, might be a great source of housing, or maybe there's a office park that, doesn't have a lot of tenants because of the move to work from home, and maybe, housing could be an option now. So thinking about more incentivizing that quality housing project on the right site. So.
Hand off the mic.
Are you gonna?
Oh, I guess it is a little curious to me that we are so desperate for housing or to cram more people into a 2-mile area that we want to dig up parking lots. But that said, I want to point out something. My name is Maxine. I'm in Ward 5. I bought my house condemned. I'm next to what has been classified the worst apartment building in the city by the police for years and years. All that said, that's just a little background. I want to point out that a significant number of people whose taxes pay for initiatives around here are senior citizens, longtime residents. We are 17% of the county. And I don't even see anything here that even addresses the fact that seniors are being taxed out of their own homes. Now, earlier this year, the county suggested a piece of legislation. It was tiered tax relief for seniors based on income. I think it is 4523. It was rejected by Kate Stewart and Mark Ehrlich and the council because it would possibly disproportionately benefit white homeowners, which to me is about as racist as it gets. And I'm not even a white person. I'm a mixed person. Okay? You're ready to suggest that you're going to give $10,000 of first-time buyer assistance to people, which is all well and good when you've got senior citizens here who can't even pay their taxes. So I want to know, what are you guys doing to help people, seniors, stay in their home? Because we know that the benchmark of success in the United States for generations has been home ownership. So we keep pushing people into renting. Well, that's just great, but renting is not stable housing. I know that because I was a renter for years. And I keep looking at this incredible hypocrisy, you know, penalizing people because of their skin tone inadvertently undermines the same tax relief that my Hispanic neighbor Jim, who lives across the street from my councilwoman, who cannot pay his mortgage, or my neighbor next door, who is a white lady whose husband and her adopted 2 black kids in the 70s. She now has 4 black grandchildren, a black Hispanic great-grandchildren. Her entire family, daughter and son, are now living all back at home, and she can't afford to replace her windows. But she somehow benefits from, you know, or she'll disproportionately benefit from a tax break. I mean, all of this, and I'm happy to share that memo that I received from council because I was stunned. I said, you know, empowerment is not becoming what we're fighting, you know? And to me, this was just appalling. And I just want to know, in all of this planning, how are we taking care of the people who built this community and whose taxes fund a lot of this? That's, yeah, and I'm just amazed at where this is all going, to be honest with you. And I have a small rental unit that I stopped renting years ago because it became too difficult. It just was like, wow, I know there's a housing thing. I had students living downstairs. I just gave it up. And about the time that, you know, I found absolutely no help in any of dealing with a very difficult building, you know, that is a constant target for the police. That, I mean, to me, this is just not just. So I want to know, what are you all thinking about your existing homeowners, specifically your elders who are being taxed out of their homes?
Yeah, thank you for that comment. So our code enforcement team has put together a grant proposal with Village at Tacoma to help aging homeowners with some of their pieces.
Taxes, not little household repairs. We're talking about property tax. $10,000 a homeowner, you know, first-time buyer assistance is a wonderful thing. But if you're in your 70s and your tax bill is close to that, then having somebody come and fix a broken door doesn't mean a thing to you.
So I'll start with tax policy is set as part of the budgetary process, and that goes through the public process set forth by the city council. And so that piece of the puzzle is kind of not necessarily something that we're working on in our department. That said, we have programs designed to assist homeowners. So I talked about the Village at Tacoma. Our emergency assistance program can help individuals who are facing foreclosure. And then there are other programs at the state and county level related to aging in place, helping create, you know, grant and loan programs around accessibility that exist as well. I understand that this is a very contentious issue, and unfortunately, I think, and unfortunately, yeah, and like I said, I understand that this is a great question and a great debate. Unfortunately, this is not something that our department is working on at the moment.
I do think, excuse me, I'm David Eubanks, Deputy City Manager. One program that would be helpful and is currently a program that the city sponsors and has for several years now is the Senior Tax Rebate Program, which complements the county's program. And the city puts forth a budget item every year to support that effort. I do think, to Devin's point, that it is helpful, the program that code enforcement is putting together to assist seniors with repairs in their homes. And Devin, if you could share some information, I think, in a blog that could go out to the public about that, that would be very helpful too. But it is a very good question, and it is something that's on the city's mind on a regular basis, and we appreciate you for raising it.
Any of these programs are meaningful, people would not be leaving. I quoted $12,000 for minor repairs at my house. $12,000. for fixing a fence and shoring up a set of stairs that keep people from slipping. If these initiatives, these little $600 credit, or will, join the village for $25, we'll come fix a cabinet for you, were meaningful, people would not be taxed out of their own homes. We are being denied meaningful tax relief.
Arthur David Olson, Ward 4. On the new housing credit, right now, the city spends out of general funds an average of about $4,400 a year on each existing unit in the city. If 100 new units go in on Hospital Hill at the old abandoned hospital site, that'll be about $440,000 worth of new expenses for the city. The city's not going to be able to pay those expenses from taxes on that property because of the tax credit program. So the question is, how will the city pay for the new expenses that are going to be associated with the new housing?
Yeah, great question. So as part of any development and the project review process with the county, there's a look at public benefits. So what are the impacts of that project, and what public benefits does it need to provide? And there's a really great blog post up on the webpage kind of briefly pointing to it and kind of briefly explaining it. And so that would be one of the things that would be looked at, especially in regards to roads and schools where impact fees are levied against that project. And that comes back to the city through tax duplication. In terms of kind of city services such as Parks and Recreation, the Housing Department, and Public Works, we have different ways that we collect on some of the services we offer, such as our stormwater, annual stormwater fee. The city levies a rental licensing fee on every single unit that is rented out in the city. And then there is a public budgeting process in which we look at kind of our budgets, our staffing, and set those going forward. So that there are ways and controls that we have about our costs. So the goal is, however, is that yes, we are foregoing some revenue that we would create in a project. The idea would be is that we would reap long-term reward through the development of new housing that would come on and pay increased taxes.
Thank you, Roz. I didn't mean to take a prerogative here or anything, but since we started to veer in a direction that borders on some uncomfortable things about presuppositions about race and things, I did want to say that the things that we are talking about here are directly related to whether or not people who have affordable housing can rehabilitate it for the benefit of more housing, or that people who are interested in thinking about putting housing somewhere, who ordinarily think about the marketplace around here in very impolite terms, might be incentivized to do so. And those incentives, it's important to think about that because, and this is one of the things that frustrates me, having worked in this area for a long time. When Region Forward by the council government started in 2014. And the first thing that they said was that we were 146,000 housing units down. And in that time, there has not been the requisite increase in affordable housing units anywhere. And one of the reasons for this is the market forces associated with the way developers do business and the way they pencil things on the street. If we are trying to add an incentive to a system that we are trying to hold on to the integrity of the right of people to not be gouged out of their homes, at the same time as the goal is to try to incentivize some other people to do some of these things, we're going to have to be able to talk about these things with a push and pull associated with treating each other with some respect and not assuming that these things are litmus test based. or that there's a magic formula for minorities, or there's a magic formula for homeowners, or because the reality is the economic pressures associated with living in a place that people want to live for self-selected reasons is going to add a kicker in the law and econ framework of your housing at the same time as you are trying to hold on to the values that you've espoused in your house. And so when you drive around and when you see people who are attempting to make homes that are smaller or right-sized, and they go catastrophically through the roof and then someone redevelops the parcel, or someone is trying to redevelop their home and they're forced to deal with the valuations that are currently going on, those things aren't fair to anybody. And their financial decisions are being made very far away. In our ward, you know, like one of the things we talked about before, you live on the other side of the street, you have nicer houses, but they are $100,000 kicker less because they're on the other side of the street. And at some point, we're going to look at these things as the interdisciplinary realities that they are and the interjurisdictional realities that there are, because looming in the background of all of this is going to be a ton of people with the purple line exactly outside of our jurisdictional control. And so the balancing of trying to make sure that all of these people can feel welcome in a place that has complicated welcome patterns is going to be important. So I just wanted to say that. I have no beef with anybody. I'm not beefing with the staff or anybody in here, but we have to be able to treat people with a decency when we're trying to deal with issues that have a complexity that give people ire. At the end of the day, all of these houses are affected by the Federal Housing Administration's policies early on to keep them segregated. So as we go through these things, we have to be decent to each other as we do it. Thank you.
My apologies. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, okay. Susan Rogers, Ward 2. If I understand correctly, these tax incentive credits are generally concerning existing zoning. I myself am very upset with what has been passed by both the county and the city regarding the MMPA, which is all about rezoning. And I'm especially concerned about the fact that there may be huge amount of displacement of people that are presently living in the apartment buildings on Maple Avenue. How do these tax incentives protect them?
Yeah, this is a good question and something that staff has thought about. So in scaling this credit, you are only getting credit for new units created. So if you are knocking down a building and simply replacing the units there, you are not eligible for this credit. If you are knocking down a building and putting 10 new units, oh, I did such a great job, I did 10 new units, we are going to scale that credit to only give you the percentage of new units you create. So if you only create 10 new units in a 100 unit build, 100 unit project, you get 10% of that credit. The idea is that we do not want to be incentivizing any teardowns. And so that's how we've kind of approached this.
Any other questions in the room here?
I think Roz will really quickly jump to some of the online questions.
Yeah.
And then we'll hop back. Just take
All right. So we have a question online from Catherine Tunis. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing your last name, regarding the quality of housing that would be getting built under the tax credit. And she asks, what guarantees that you would have new housing that won't be so cheaply built as to actually pay off after years 16 plus? Or can housing built so cheaply, or would housing be built so cheaply that it's starting to fall apart by year 15?
Yeah. So all new housing proposed has to be built to the building code set forth by Montgomery County. And this has been strengthened in many years to provide not only better building materials, but also more energy efficiency, better stormwater management, and also with an eye towards electrification and decarbonization. So these newer buildings are more energy efficient, are better for the environment, and are a better quality of living overall. So.
And then we have a question from Elizabeth Wallace asking if a building undergoes substantial renovation, she assumes it would increase the assessed value of the property. So how does that affect the equation for tax credits?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm assuming this is related to the apologies. The substantial rehab credit. So it would still be 50% of the tax bill. So they would see a property owner would be paying a little bit more in their property taxes, but they would also be getting some of that paid for by or knocked off as part of the credit. What about Frank? Can you,
Yeah.
do that one?
So, sorry. We have a question from Frank Damaris. How would the plan apply to redevelopment of a building like Duval? A 101 unit building with new height and density could support an additional 100+ units. Any teardown and redevelopment would eliminate 101 currently deeply affordable, and any new would have the 12.5% MPDU affordable and 87.5% rents, well above the current market, losing 75 or so affordable, and could become condos with MPDUs priced for moderate income. Would such a development qualify for tax credits on 100 units?
So I think this is a similar question that was proposed earlier about kind of displacement. So similarly, there would be, if you are simply tearing down a building and putting up a new one, you would not be eligible for this tax credit. And so that would not be something that would be eligible.
Garden apartment, say like across the street, and then it was 2 or 3 stories, and then it was zoned for 15 stories. Would it still not be profitable for a developer to tear down?
Yeah, so there's a balancing act, right? So when we're looking at kind of how the housing market works, when a property owner has a building that is actively making money, has tenants, there is very little incentive to tear that building down. Similar to operating a store. Tearing down a building is a complex process and has a long kind of period where the building and the land would simply sit there and they would pay taxes and upkeep on that land. And so this tax credit is, as noted earlier, is a small amount and is intended to kind of help nudge, but we do not believe as staff that this would turn the needle so much that it would encourage the type of teardown that you're proposing as a hypothetical. Oh, okay. I think, yeah, we're going to go back to the room.
Okay.
I have several questions, but I'll cram them into the available time, so I'm sorry if they're going to cover several topics. So you mentioned that there will be an outside fiscal analysis completed, and I want to know if that's going to be completed for a reasonable period of time and available to the city council and the rest of us before the scheduled votes, which are in October. So when will we see that fiscal analysis? Secondly, what if an older building is past the 40-year deed restriction period that initially applied to them? Would they still be eligible for the rehabilitation credit? Because it says in the documents that you gave us that they would have to be qualifying as under the regulatory agreements, which may have expired. I think some have said those agreements have expired for the buildings that they had before. So are you going to make the credit available to them? And you may have just answered this, but I want to just clarify whether the displacement limitation the restriction on availability of the tax credit that you described for the new housing tax credit, when smaller buildings are replaced by larger buildings, would they also be subject to that displacement limitation? I think that's what Roger was alluding to. Are you going to require that they not displace people in order to be eligible, even if you think the scenario is unlikely? And do I have another 10 seconds?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. The reason I'm asking you about the fiscal analysis is because some of the statements in the staffing report were troubling. City staffing and costs are not determined by the number of residents, it said, and increasing city costs may not be the result of new development. So those are statements that when we heard ADO's comment earlier, he gave a per person cost of city government. That's a rough, $4,400 per person. That suggests that costs per new resident could actually be at least estimated, if not known. So these are the reasons why I'm asking for the fiscal analysis before you take votes. Will we have it?
Yeah, so we're working on that right now with the outside firm. They are hard at work on it, and I'm hoping that they will have a completed kind of report for publication by mid-October. Fingers crossed. In regards to deed restrictions, for our affordable housing preservation tax credit, they need to have an existing regulatory agreement. That is kind of the trade-off of why you would get the credit. For the rehabilitation credit, it is open to the idea would be that it would be open to any multifamily building. So it could be a deed restricted affordable housing building that is going through a rehabilitation. It could be a rent stabilized building that could be going through it. The idea is that, you have to be doing a substantial rehabilitation that's not displacing residents. In regards to displacement, I'll talk about kind of just briefly some additional policies that do exist. So there is the county's Chapter 53, which sets forth notification timelines and potential payments for any demolition or substantial rehab work that is going on, and that does apply to the city as well. There's also the no net loss requirements within the minor master plan as well, which would be part of the county review, and is a policy that would be applied as part of that review of any proposed project development. I think so the answer is the tax break is related to, it's an incentive tool, it's a financing tool. There are other tools addressing displacement, and that's why I'm talking about those. So for the substantial rehab credit, and I know that the comms team is looking at me very angrily because I know that there needs to be a microphone there to pick up your question, but the question is would they lose the credit if they displace? For the substantial rehab credit, yes, they would lose the credit.
Who's gonna hold me or you? Thank you. Okay. Paul Huebner, Ward 3. A couple of questions. One is on the scale of the plan, and one is on the ROI. And then a different question I have also. So my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, first of all, there's a lot of chatter in the city. It's election time. And many people are saying that they support, quote, affordable housing because it will, quote, increase the tax base. This plan purports to increase at a maximum 200 units, correct? And the lifespan to completion of those units is approximately when? 3 years, 5 years? What's your projected idea? And if you talk to any developers, it'll take a year to get their permits and their design done. Okay. Then it'll take another, if we look at the library, it'll take another year and a half to get their permits. So what we're talking about is giving a tax credit and relief from rent stabilization for 15 years. One question is, why both? Why do you have to give both? Because if I built a building here, I'll tell you what I'd do. I would build the building, I would milk it for 12 years and sell the building. Then the next guy eats the rent stabilization and the balloon payment that's due at the end of 15 years. Is that not essentially a balloon payment that you're relieved from tax, the increased assessed value of the property for 10 to 15 years? It's an ascending scale from 10 to 15 where the property value will increase based upon market rates. And at that point in time, at the end of 15 years, will it go up from 10 to 15, like 20% a year. It will increase in value and you will pay an increased percentage of the tax on the building. So as the tax increased, I'd sell the building. And then, then the poor next guy or gal would eat the thing. So that's what I've seen in the real world in terms of buying, selling, and developing buildings. Now, you are in fact talking about 200 units, right?
So yeah, so the goal we've set is 200 units over 10 years, with the idea that we haven't built any new multifamily really in 40 years. What I would say is this in no way changes rent stabilization. There is no policy on the table. This is not proposing any change to rent stabilization as it exists in the city today.
But the new buildings are free from rent stabilization along with the tax credit, correct? Except for the 15% MPDUs.
The rent stabilization is the same that it is today. Correct.
Maybe you could clarify that point then, since there seems to be some disagreement on what.
So rent stabilization as it exists today grants a 5-year exemption from the requirements for newly constructed units. That is not on the table for any change under any of these proposals.
So how does rent stabilization come into play with the new building?
They would have a 5-year period in which they could set rents, and then in year 6, they would be required to comply with rent stabilization.
So, and when would the city finally receive any revenue from the new buildings? If it takes 3 to 5 years to build, and then they're exempt again from that point on time, at least 5 to 15 years, it would be theoretically, it sounds to me like it's going to be 15 or 20 years before the city will feel a dime. Is that correct or incorrect?
So they would continue paying the tax bill that they were paying before the project for those 15 years. In year 15, they would pay their full tax bill.
The increased assessed value.
Correct.
Thank you.
I would like to know how would the long-term renovation program work, with builders in terms of the MMPA?
Yeah. So there would not be any interplay necessarily with the minor master plan, which sets forward the zoning. For the rehabilitation credit, builders could apply for it. To get that, they would have to demonstrate that they are doing a substantial renovation, and they would not get the credit until they have completed that through a use and occupancy permit issued by the County Department of Permitting. And that is when they would get it. So that's the kind of carrot at the end of it, is they wouldn't see the money until they undergo the rehabilitation work.
How about if there are landlords who abuse these programs? Will there be a way to, find out or things like that?
So we're working with our city attorney on drafting language right now, and working on ways to ensure that if a landlord does not, or a property owner violates the terms of this tax credit, we are able to not only stop the credit, but potentially claw the money back.
Let me, is this on?
Yeah, of course.
Just to catch a couple Zoom questions here for folks who have been waiting a little bit. We have a question from Autumn Harrison asking, what is the city doing to address the current aging small multifamily in Ward 5? She lives in her building, and due to property taxes and rent stabilization, the building is only 3 units and doesn't qualify for any grants. She adds that many of the units in this ward are in derelict condition.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So this is where kind of the rehabilitation credit is being proposed and being targeted to not only large buildings, but smaller buildings as well. And then there's also the multifamily building improvement grant, which is focused, and I apologize, I've been talking a lot, my throat is drying up. And that is focused on smaller scale, 20 units or fewer buildings. So we actually have been working with 7 buildings for the 2024 round, and they have contractors going out there and getting bids at the moment, and we're hoping to bring forward some awards in the next month or so for approval by council so that they can get to work on those upgrades. I think we'll bounce back.
I'll come back. Hi. So with the fiscal analysis that was mentioned a couple questions ago, will you and your staff advise the council to hold off on a vote if that analysis is not done by the end of October? Or are you going to push it forward?
So I think the timing is up to council. What we would say is we are working to meet that timeline and are hopeful that we can have that by mid-October.
Sure. So if things don't work out, somebody gets sick at a crucial moment, and then analysis isn't done by the end of October, would you advise, as a highly respected staff member, would you advise council to hold off until that analysis report is in hand, or would you let them go on their merry way?
What I would say here is that we are going to do our best to get it forward. And if we think that, and hopefully we'll have some preliminary results so that we have some idea of how it would turn out if it does get delayed. But our goal would be to give council as much information as possible. And if that is a, hey, this needs more work, we would tell them that.
Hi. I just wanted to ask you if you might talk a little bit, and maybe it would be helpful to the group here and people online and everybody in Tacoma Park to have a list maybe of what the city will receive, because a lot of people don't know. I think that landlords pay for trash collection. We pay for the stormwater fees. We pay for the license fees. We pay for a lot of, we pay for lead inspection. Well, you don't get that money, sorry. But we do, there are other things that the city would still have coming to it if new rental housing units were available. And I think people aren't really, it sounds like people aren't so clear about that. The other thing that I wanted to say is that the current, I don't know how many people are asked to vacate their properties, but I do, or homes, rental homes. But I do know that landlords, when there is no lease, a landlord can ask a person to vacate their property. And I think that is very unsettling. And from a renter's perspective, from a landowner's or a landlord's perspective, it's also unsettling when you live in a building with a small building like I do, and maybe you have some things that aren't going quite wonderfully. And the other thing, and I don't want to, I highly support, I think it's great to bring some new housing to Tacoma Park that we haven't had in such a long time. But the other thing that I just wanted to mention is, without holding up, because I absolutely would not want to hold up anything, but I just wonder if the city has thought about other ways that it might support our infrastructure through new housing or through all housing. For instance, I don't know what capacity we have as a city to allow apartments to be built without everyone having a space for a car. And I would wholeheartedly support limiting cars in large, or any, actually, I mean, in general, for myself too. I mean, I have to provide parking spaces, a parking space per unit. And I would love to be able to tell people that they really, to market to people that would be interested. I live literally like 5 minutes walk, if you aren't walking fast, from the metro, and so cars aren't always necessary. And I think that that would be something that would help the infrastructure piece as we consider going forward and having new housing, is to not have as many cars on the road, et cetera. And thank you so much for the informative presentation tonight.
Did you have?
I think
Sorry. So now we're on. Okay.
I think we have time for just a couple more questions. I know there's a whole bunch that we won't be able to get to. Okay.
Okay, so I just wanted to, as a comment, I thought the resident who made the point about where is the tax consideration or the tax proposal for homeowners who are on fixed incomes and are struggling to pay their taxes. I understand that none of these tax credits address that, but I think her question is, if you're going to deal with tax credits, isn't this an opportunity to deal with that issue? So I would just like to echo that if we're going to do tax credits, then have you considered that, and what did you decide, and why did you decide not to offer it right away? Also, in terms of the nudge, I think one of the concerns about the upzoning of Maple Avenue is that that is a real incentive, and then you're proposing adding a nudge on top of it. So in your analysis, I'm hoping that you're asking the company to analyze what the impact of the MMPA upzoning will be combined with the nudge you're talking about in terms of displacement and loss of affordable housing. And then my question is, in terms of the eviction rate, it looks like the city's eviction rate is more than twice what the county eviction rate is. Have you analyzed why that is, and what are you proposing? What kind of thing could be done about it? And this gets to my larger question about why not get this fiscal analysis, but also do a real comprehensive review of all the different programs you intend to eventually propose and review. Like rent stabilization, I see as in your next phase. Tenant protection is supposed to be your next phase, but why not come up with a real great staff analysis of all your existing programs, what could be done to added to your palette of programs before pulling out a few tax credits and passing them. And then you've closed off some doors because you've already foregone possible taxes that could help you pay for other things.
Yeah, so a lot of great questions in there. I'll start with the eviction rate. So we are higher than the counties. We are under the state's eviction rate. And there's a few reasons for that. One, starting with we have a large amount of affordable housing and a large number of individuals who are low income compared to the county as a proportion of our population. One of the statistics I like to quote is we're about 2% of the county's population, and we represent about 7 to 8% of their affordable housing. And that leads to a lot of cases of failure to pay rent. And this is why we have our emergency assistance program. We help about 40 families a year stay in their homes. Regarding kind of a senior tax, that is something that I'll be honest, we haven't looked at, partially because it's a really complicated and thorny issue. Maybe it's something we need to look at. It wasn't included in this proposal. I will say a large part of why we're bringing these proposals forward are there was a lot of work done on the 2019 Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan, which laid out a lot of different policies, which we are in the process of implementing. And so that's where a lot of this is coming from.
Hi, I'm Ashley Brookshire, and I live in Ward 3. And I just wanted to first thank city staff for all of your work on this. It's clear that a lot of thought and intention has gone into it, and appreciate you taking the time to answer all of our questions tonight. Overall, I think this sounds great. I think it's a great idea. Your point that we have not created any new housing, any new multifamily housing in the last 40 years, I think is just really shocking and troubling. Our existing multifamily housing and affordable housing is such an important part of our city, and I'm grateful we have it, and I really hope we can add to it, and I think this proposal will do that. One thing I was hoping you could clarify is the timeline for these proposals. You know, the council is going to vote on it currently as planned in October, but obviously it doesn't go into effect, you know, the day after the vote, right? So could you talk a little bit more about what that timeline will be and what that process for the regulations and further public comment will look like?
Yeah, so great question. Once it gets approved, there will be an ordinance that'll go into effect, but what our department does is take that and turn that into what we call administrative regulations. So taking the law and putting it into the, in order to do this, this is the form you need to fill out, all that fun bureaucracy. And those get released for public comment. They have to be noticed in our newsletter. We try to make it available for the public to take a look at them and kind of kick the tires a little bit, provide comment and feedback. The hope is that we would get those sometime in, let's say, early 2025, you know, fingers crossed, for that public comment period, which is about 30 days. Then based on that, we develop kind of our forms and our full process, finalize them. And then the hope would be is that we would start issuing these credits in the next fiscal year, which would be fiscal year 2027, which covers 2026 to 2027. So July 2026 would be when these really start to take effect. Oh, yeah. We'll give Ross a second to run over.
Want to make sure everybody gets a chance to have their questions fielded here. So we have one from Lori Mazur asking if there's anything else you could say on what the status of the county or state tax credits for missing middle housing is.
Yeah, so these are more focused on, I believe, at the county level, zoning changes. I'm less familiar with the state proposals. They are currently in listening sessions. I believe they're hosting a number of these listening sessions throughout September and October. So I'd encourage you to go to the county website and look at those and sign up to attend those. And likely, I imagine sometime next year, they will be having zoning text amendments, things for county council consideration. And I will stop there and just plug all the wonderful colleagues at the county. Go look at their work. They're doing a great job over there.
I think, yeah.
We are actually past time, so I just want to say that if anyone needs to leave now, leave before we finish talking, we'll do that. But time for one or two more. I think Tom, you were next.
Okay, so folks, the timeline is, according to the city clerk's publications that this matter will be first read on October the 23rd, and it will be voted on October the 30th. Now, I have repeatedly asked that more information be provided to all of Tacoma Park through the newsletter, the most effective means of communication available. The website has lots of information. It's difficult to find things on the website. You put a front page story saying, we're done, here's our package. That was good, but it wasn't enough. You have to slow this down. You have to provide the entire public with the financial impact statement that you've talked about. The vote, the consideration and the vote shouldn't come after somebody has it in hand, but after the public has had a chance to know of its existence, to have read it, studied it, analyzed it, and had an opportunity to comment on it. That has been the largest failure of the current mayor and council. We got the bum's rush first from the county on the MMPA. We got it secondly from the city council. And I say this while I've been sitting here all night thinking, look at how much we agree about. But I'm looking at the body language, and I know how people are reacting to this criticism. I criticize every elected official for a single purpose, to make sure that things get done better. The highest duty of a member of a democratic society is to speak truth to power. It is not to get along. It is not to say, I agree because I don't want to have an argument. There is a vast difference between conflict avoidance, which a lot of people here are very good at, and conflict resolution. Jason Small spoke very precisely tonight about how there are so many moving pieces, my words, not his, but these moving pieces have to be coordinated. You have to, look, this was a great presentation, but could it be better? Yes, of course, anything can be made better. You have to look at the negative consequences. You have to look at the pluses, the minuses, the alternatives before you make a decision. And Devin, I'm talking more to the elected people here tonight than I am to you, but I'm talking to everybody in the audience. How many times have I stood before the council and said I have better things to do? Believe me, I had better things to do tonight. But this is important. It's important that we get it right. Don't be defensive because you're being criticized. Evaluate the criticism. If it's valid, accept it. If it's not, go ahead. Do what you're going to do. You have the final say. But there is, let me just add on this. There's a vast area of agreement. We got a vacant hospital. Who wants a vacant hospital in town? Let's put our effort into developing that property. And I'm not selfish. And I've been accused twice publicly by somebody sitting in this audience of being selfish. That kind of accusation is counterproductive.
I think
If they haven't spoken, let them speak first.
Is there anybody online?
anybody who hasn't spoken that wants a chance to,
Okay.
let me just see if there's anybody online.
Should we give everybody?
Anyone else online that,
I think we've captured most of
okay.
most of the
All right, I gotcha. Sorry. Come to me, I think.
I'm responding to the woman in Ward 1 on Maple who rents, and then the idea of encouraging public transportation. Our current population density is about 8,400 people per square mile. Studies show that if you can get up past 10,000 people per square mile, you make a circulator shuttle begin to be a feasible, viable option. So I would like to encourage you in providing guidance to the council to think about what is the target population density we are looking for in 15 or 30 years. Right now, we're the 5th densest municipality in the state, but you know, that's because of our small boundaries. DC's at 11,000. Mount Rainier is the most dense in the state at 13,000 per square mile. But it's a really good way to think about setting targets rather than, as I said earlier, just having no sunset and kind of just see what happens.
I think we really do need to cut it off. Do you agree, or?
Anybody else online?
I think we've got most.
Got it covered, so Paul,
You
you
can ask me 3 times.
you've already spoken.
All right,
Make it
so
quick.
Couple of things.
No one.
You mentioned the homeowner's tax credit. Okay. The problem with living in Tacoma Park is that if you have equity over $300,000, you don't qualify for it because you have too much equity in your home. I'll buy anybody's house for $300,000 tomorrow. If there's a house in Tacoma Park for $300,000, I guarantee you can sell it tomorrow. Okay, because there are none. All right, and so that thing is kind of like it's questionable how realistic it is for people getting that tax credit. But I want to say that IRA did a study where he said that 20 to 40%, 20% of Tacoma Park homeowners are housing burden, and a large percentage are extremely housing burden. That means they spend over 40% of their gross income on housing. Okay, 15% of the population is over 65, potentially on fixed incomes. So as property values escalate, it puts a disproportionate load on people on fixed incomes. And I pay as much now in my taxes as I did when I bought my house 35 years ago. And that was at 14% interest. I mean, it's just, so this is not your thing, but I think in terms of this, and the last final question is, what is in the 15 years that this will take at least to come to fruition, what will be the return on investment for the investment that the Tacoma Park taxpayers are making into this endeavor?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think I've said earlier there's a wide range depending on kind of what sort of project comes in. We're hoping to provide more information through this analysis that we're working on, and I know that it's not coming as quickly as we had hoped, but we're working towards getting that there to put some numbers to it.
Thank you to the members of the council and the staff. I know, I'm tired. You guys got to be beat. You've been here all day. So I want to thank you for that. And, you're elected to work once a week or something, right? And you get the 24/7 treatment. Thank you. I'm sorry, and sorry Talisha left.
Jessica's got.
What time is it?
Jessica, you have a question?
Thank you for your indulgence. I would like to ask, first of all, I want to thank you, Devin, for your candor about the possibility that the fiscal analysis is not going to be in hand any day now. The votes are scheduled to occur, literally the last vote on this, enacting it into law, is currently scheduled to occur on October 30th, literally 5 days before the election ends. And I would like to ask the city council and the city manager to commit to giving the city councils and the public at least 15 days between when the fiscal analysis is available and when you take a vote. Otherwise, how can it be how could the city council responsibly vote to essentially limit our tax revenues for an unlimited period of time without the fiscal analysis in hand? And it's not just, as Tom said, not just the city council who ought to be able to see those facts. It's the public. It's really not fair, especially if the newsletter is your vehicle. The newsletter doesn't come out every day. It's really not fair to burden the city council with taking a vote without that information in hand. And it's certainly not fair to the taxpayers and / voters to have that sort of decision made in a vacuum, in an information vacuum. And the language that's in your staff report suggests that you do not have the cost information currently available, hopefully your fiscal analysis is going to clarify that. So please, I'm asking for a commitment from the city manager to recommend that to the city council, that they withhold taking votes until we have had a chance to see the analysis. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm sorry that you're over time because you're all tired. I really want to echo what Paul Hubner, you just said. Could we please have a round of applause for our staff? I really mean it, please. Could we please? And particularly for Devin McNally, you've been in the hot seat all night. You've worked incredibly hard, and this is the first time I think that I have seen that you've been in this position to respond directly to the residents of the town, and I think you've done a stellar job of answering some really tough comments. And thank you for listening to us, and thank you for being there. And I just want to ask that residents don't ask things of our staff members that are questions for the city council. Thank you.
Thank you to the city staff for doing all this. And I just wanted to say to folks who have been, who've brought up property tax credits for existing homeowners that live here, I have done a lot of work on it. I'm not going to bore you all with that right now, but I'm happy to hang around for a few minutes and talk to you about what we've been working on and what has not been successful at the state and county level. Thank you.
I think we have one more online comment.
There's always room for one more.
So I think this works as a good closing question, touching on some of the things that folks have mentioned here. That someone who unfortunately didn't put their name in, but they mentioned that residents in apartments on Maple Avenue are concerned about being displaced from their homes. People are concerned that their apartment buildings will be torn down, or sorry, I lost the question here. New one's come in. People are concerned their apartment buildings will be torn down, that they won't be able to afford to come back and live in the community that they love. Could there be more information sessions that will address some of the points mentioned in today's meeting regarding apartment building improvements, tear downs, tax credits for apartments on Maple Avenue? And they also ask if this information can be made accessible to everyone, for example, through translators.
Yeah, so a quick thing is there is a tax credit. This is my chance to plug the tax credit webpage, which is updated by our fantastic comms team, which has a number of different blog posts. This will go up on there, and a full transcript, as well as the copy of the presentation tonight for anyone to see at any time, day or night. In terms of these, I know that we did a tenant forum earlier in the year. We're looking forward to hosting a landlord forum, and I think that my division in particular tries to do a few public events every year. I will note it is, it's asking a lot of our staff to do it, every week, but we try to get out into the public as much as possible to provide information, to talk about the resources that are available, and we look forward to other public events where we can inform you of not only just city programs and policies, but also other county and state programs that are available for residents.
And I will just add that it might not be obvious to those joining us by Zoom, and perhaps not to everyone in the audience, but we arranged for Spanish language interpreters tonight, and we are committed and continue to be very committed to linguistic equity in our work. So we are pushing forward on that in all ways that we can.
Okay. I think we've worked through the questions and comments, and I just want to sincerely, on behalf of the mayor and council and my staff and me, thank you for your time, your commitment, and just how much you care about this community. I think we want to work towards solutions together. You gave my staff and I a lot to think about, and that's important. That's why we added, and the mayor and council enthusiastically supported, our idea of adding this type of a session. By the way, I'm also going to be conducting, with the Mayor and Council's endorsement, a budget forum on November 12th. Okay, long before my late February or early March delivery of the budget. So we just want to express that it's important and reinforce it's important for folks to come out and share your thoughts, ideas with us while we're in the formative stage of what will be, once again, a difficult budget next year. But I think we're much stronger together. The forum tonight, again, you gave us quite a bit, all of us, I'm sure the Mayor and Council, and certainly my staff and me, some important things to think about. And we're better for it. So thank you, and we will see you again.